Welcome to Story Planet, where we bring you relaxing tales to help you unwind. Tonight's story is Echoes by the Sea. So settle in, get cozy, and let yourself be carried away into a world of peace and discovery. Now let's begin. The Seaside Arrival. The sound of waves greeted Isla as she stepped out of the car. The salty air was cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the stale heat she had left behind in the city. Before her stood the weathered seaside cottage she had rented for the next 3 months. It was modest but charming, its shutters painted a soft blue, and the roof lined with white trim that reminded her of foamy waves. Beyond the cottage lay the endless stretch of the sea, glittering under the afternoon sun. The drive to this remote coastal town had been long but oddly calming. As the urban sprawl gave way to rolling hills and then to cliffs lined with wildflowers, Isla felt something shift within her. This place, with its unhurried pace and untouched beauty, promised the escape she so desperately needed. She reached for her bag, slinging it over her shoulder, and walked toward the cottage, her footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path. Isla had been a writer once, or so she told herself. In truth, she hadn't completed a single piece of work since her husband's passing 2 years ago. Life had become a series of gray days, and her once bright imagination had withered like a neglected garden. The notebooks she had filled with vivid characters and intricate worlds now sat untouched on dusty shelves. But something about this seaside town had called to her, and she hoped its beauty might awaken the spark she had lost. The cottage was sparsely furnished, but Isla found it perfect. The living room held a sturdy wooden table, a few mismatched chairs, and an old armchair by the window. From there she could watch the waves roll in, the sunlight catching on their crests. The bedroom was small but cozy, with a quilted bedspread that carried the faint scent of lavender. In the kitchen, she discovered a basket left by the cottage's owner, filled with fresh bread, local honey, and a note that read, "Welcome to your home by the sea." Unpacking her belongings felt strangely ceremonial. She placed her notebooks and pens carefully on the desk by the window, hoping that the view of the sea might coax words from her reluctant mind. Her favorite scarf, a gift from her late husband, was draped over the back of the chair. As she hung her clothes in the narrow wardrobe and arranged her books on the small shelf, she began to imagine the life she might create here. Early mornings with the sea, quiet afternoons writing, and peaceful evenings spent listening to the rhythm of the tides. Her first night in the cottage passed uneventfully. She sat by the window with a cup of tea, the notebook she hadn't touched in months resting in her lap. She stared at the blank page, waiting for the words to come. But they didn't. Instead, she closed the notebook and let her eyes wander to the sea, where the moonlight danced on the waves. The sound of the surf was a steady hum, like a lullaby that soothed her frayed nerves. She felt a faint twinge of peace, like the first note of a forgotten melody. Sleep came easily that night, cradled by the whispers of the ocean. The next morning, Isla woke to the cry of seagulls and the golden light of dawn streaming through the curtains. Determined to begin her journey of rediscovery, she ventured down to the beach after a quick breakfast. The sand was cool and soft beneath her feet, and the gentle roar of the sea filled her ears. She walked for what felt like hours, letting the rhythm of the waves clear her mind. The beach stretched endlessly, the water lapping at the shore in a soothing, unbroken rhythm. She collected a few seashells along the way, their intricate patterns fascinating her. It was then, nestled among the rocks at the edge of the beach, that she found the first bottle. It was a simple glass bottle, its surface worn smooth by the sea. Inside was a rolled-up piece of paper, sealed with wax. Curiosity sparked in Isla as she gently uncorked the bottle and pulled out the paper. Unrolling it carefully, she found a handwritten note that read, To the one who finds this, the sea carries not just waves, but whispers. May you find what you are looking for. Ila's heart quickened. The handwriting was delicate, the ink a deep blue that contrasted beautifully with the aged paper. Who had written the note, and why? She looked out at the sea, its vastness now seeming full of secrets. 1,000 questions filled her mind, each one as elusive as the horizon. She folded the note carefully and slipped it into her pocket. As she continued her walk, she couldn't shake the feeling that the sea had spoken to her in some way. Back at the cottage, she placed the note on her desk, propping it up against a stack of books. It sat there like an invitation, its message echoing in her thoughts. "What are you trying to tell me?" She murmured to the sea that evening, her voice barely louder than the waves. For the first time in years, she felt the pull of a story waiting to be told. The blank pages of her notebook no longer felt intimidating. They felt like a promise. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Isla sat by the window, pen in hand, and began to write. The message in the bottle. The discovery of the bottle lingered in Isla's thoughts all day. The note, though brief, seemed to carry an inexplicable weight, as if it had been written just for her. It sat on the desk by the window, propped against a pile of untouched notebooks. Every time Isla's gaze wandered to it, she felt a tug, a pull toward something she couldn't yet name. She spent the rest of the day pacing the cottage, making tea she didn't drink, and staring at the blank pages of her notebook. The sea outside seemed louder than usual, its crashing waves an insistent call. The following morning, Isla ventured back to the beach, hoping to clear her head. The sky was overcast, and a cool breeze swept through the air, carrying the briny scent of the ocean. She walked along the shoreline, her eyes scanning the sand and rocks as if another bottle might materialize. The beach stretched endlessly, its quiet expanse broken only by the occasional cry of a seagull. Her patience was rewarded. Nestled in a cluster of rocks, partially covered by seaweed, she spotted the glint of glass. Her heart quickened as she hurried to retrieve it. The bottle was similar to the first but slightly larger, with a cork sealed tightly in place. Inside, another note awaited. Isla's fingers trembled as she uncorked the bottle and extracted the paper. The handwriting was the same, delicate, deliberate, and the ink a deep blue. The message read, "The sea holds countless stories. What will yours be?" The words struck a chord deep within her. For so long, Isla had felt adrift, her own stories stagnant and unresolved. The message felt like a challenge, urging her to confront the chapters of her life she had avoided. Who was writing these notes? And why were they finding her? Isla tucked the note into her pocket and continued her walk, her mind racing. The sea, vast and unknowable, suddenly felt alive with secrets. She began to notice things she hadn't before. The intricate patterns left by retreating waves, the faint hum of the wind weaving through the cliffs. It was as if the world around her had become a story, waiting to be read. Back at the cottage, Isla placed the new note beside the first on her desk. Together, they seemed to form the beginnings of a puzzle. She stared at them for a long time, her mind churning with possibilities. Finally, she grabbed a pen and a blank sheet of paper. If someone out there was sending messages, perhaps she could send one back. Her words came slowly at first, hesitant and unsure. But as the ink flowed, so did her thoughts. She wrote, "To the one who writes to the sea, your words have found a weary traveler. Thank you for reminding me that stories still wait to be told. Who are you? And how do you know the questions I've been too afraid to ask?" Isla read the message over several times, feeling a mix of vulnerability and determination. She carefully rolled the paper, placed it inside an empty wine bottle, and sealed it with a cork she had found in the kitchen drawer. Holding the bottle tightly, she walked back to the beach, the evening sky painted in shades of pink and gold. The tide was coming in, and Isla waded into the cool water until the waves lapped at her knees. With a deep breath, she cast the bottle into the sea, watching as it floated away. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope, a belief that her story was not yet finished. Over the next few days, Isla's routine began to shift. Each morning, she walked along the beach, scanning the shoreline for new bottles. Afternoons were spent at her desk, not always writing but always thinking, the empty pages of her notebook slowly filling with fragments of ideas. Evenings were reserved for the sea. She would sit on the porch, the notes beside her, and listen to the waves, wondering if her message had reached someone. Then, on a particularly windy afternoon, Isla found another bottle. This one was wedged between two jagged rocks, its glass scratched and worn. She retrieved it with care, her anticipation mingled with nervous excitement. The note inside was shorter than the others, but no less profound. The sea whispers to those who listen. Isla's breath caught. These messages, simple as they were, felt like a lifeline. She folded the note and pressed it to her chest, a strange warmth spreading through her. She didn't know who was sending them or why, but she knew this. She wasn't alone. That evening, Isla returned to her desk. She opened her notebook and began to write, not about the bottles or the sea, but about herself. She wrote about the pain she had carried, the love she had lost, and the dreams she had abandoned. The words came haltingly at first, but soon they flowed like the tide, steady and unrelenting. For the first time in years, Isla felt like a writer again. As the moon rose over the sea, its light shimmering on the waves, Isla placed her pen down and read what she had written. The story wasn't perfect, but it was hers. And for now, that was enough, a writer again. Threads of connection. Isla woke to the golden light of curtains. The wind carried the scent of salt and the faint echoes of waves breaking against the shore. Isla awoke to the golden light of dawn filtering through her curtains, her mind still tangled with thoughts of the notes she had found. The most recent one, simple yet profound, rested on her desk. The sea whispers to those who listen. Each word seemed to ripple through her, touching parts of her heart she had long thought dormant. The sea's voice, carried through these messages, had become an anchor in her days, and she felt the pull to uncover more. That morning, as she walked along the beach, the tide was unusually high, its waves frothy and playful. Her eyes scanned the shoreline with a practiced attentiveness, looking for another bottle. The air was crisp, and seagulls hovered above, their cries blending with the sound of the water. She had walked nearly the entire stretch of the beach when something glinted among the rocks, partially hidden beneath a tangle of seaweed. Isla quickened her pace, her heart beating with anticipation. Kneeling, she retrieved the bottle and brushed away the damp seaweed. It was smaller than the others, with a faint greenish tint to the glass. The cork was tightly wedged, and her fingers fumbled as she worked to extract it. Inside, the note was rolled so tightly it took care to uncoil it without tearing the delicate paper. The message, written in the same unmistakable handwriting, read, "Every story has its tides. Some rise with joy, others ebb with sorrow. Where does your tide flow?" The words struck a chord deep within her. Isla folded the note carefully and placed it in her pocket, her thoughts swirling like the waves. She began to notice the parallels between the messages and her own life, the joy she had once felt, the sorrow that had drowned it, and now the cautious hope that seemed to be rising like a new tide. As she walked back to the cottage, Isla's mind was filled with questions. Who was sending these notes? Was it truly coincidence that they had found her, or had some unseen hand guided them to her shore? And what did the writer know of tides and sorrow? There was an intimacy to the messages that felt almost intrusive, yet comforting at the same time. Back at the cottage, Isla arranged the 3 notes on her desk, their words weaving a story she couldn't quite grasp. She wondered if they were part of a larger message, each note a piece of a puzzle waiting to be solved. Determined to contribute her own voice to the exchange, she sat down with her notebook and began to write. To the one who knows the sea so well, your words have been a lifeline. I am listening. Tell me more about the tides, the stories they carry, and the whispers they leave behind. Her handwriting was hurried, the ink smudging slightly as she rolled the paper and placed it into another wine bottle. She had grown adept at sealing them, the cork fitting snugly before she walked down to the beach. The tide was retreating, leaving behind shimmering sand that sparkled in the sunlight. Isla waded into the cool water and released the bottle, watching as the waves carried it away. She stood there for a long moment, her toes sinking into the wet sand, feeling a sense of quiet determination. The next few days passed in a rhythm that felt almost meditative. Isla's mornings were spent combing the beach for bottles, her afternoons dedicated to writing. She began to fill her notebooks with not just words, but pieces of herself she had long kept hidden. Her grief, her fears, her dreams, all spilled onto the pages, as if the act of writing could make her whole again. On the fourth morning after she had sent her response, Isla found another bottle. It was wedged deep in the sand, and she had to dig with her hands to free it. The effort left her fingers gritty, but the discovery was worth it. The note inside was longer this time, the handwriting steady and flowing. The tides shape the shore, as your story shapes you. Every wave leaves its mark. Every ebb reveals something new. What marks have your tides left? What truths do they uncover? Isla sat on the sand, holding the note in her hands as the words settled over her. She thought about the marks her own tides had left, the ache of loss, the faint scars of hope, the beauty that had been buried beneath her grief. The sea, with its endless rhythm, seemed to reflect her own journey. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Isla returned to her desk. She began to write again, her words flowing with a new confidence. She wrote not only about herself, but about the sea, the notes, and the connection she felt to the unseen writer. It was as if she were collaborating with the ocean itself, weaving their stories together. When she finally set down her pen, the room was bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. Isla leaned back in her chair and looked at the notes lined up on her desk. Each one felt like a thread, pulling her closer to something she couldn't yet see but instinctively knew was important. The sea had brought her these messages, and with them it had brought her back to life. For the first time in years, Isla felt not only like a writer, but like a person who had a story worth telling. And she was determined to follow the tides wherever they might lead her. The unseen thread. The sea was restless that morning, its waves crashing against the shore with a vigor that sent spray high into the air. Isla stood at the window of her cottage, sipping a cup of tea as she watched the churning water. There was an energy to the sea that mirrored her own anticipation. Each day she walked the beach with a growing sense of purpose, her connection to the notes deepening with every discovery. She wrapped herself in a thick cardigan and ventured outside, the cold wind tugging at her hair. The beach was damp from the retreating tide, the sand dotted with smooth stones and fragments of driftwood. Isla's boots left shallow impressions as she made her way along the familiar path. She no longer questioned why she searched. It had become an instinct, as natural as breathing. The bottle lay at the water's edge, half buried in wet sand. Isla knelt to retrieve it, her fingers numb from the cold but steady with determination. The glass was frosted from the salt air, its surface roughened by the sea's embrace. She worked the cork free and carefully extracted the note within. It was damp but intact, the handwriting unmistakable. Every wave begins with the pull of the tide. What draws you forward? Isla sat on a nearby rock, the sea roaring behind her, and read the note again. What drew her forward? The question felt personal, as though the writer had reached into her heart. She thought of her life before she had come to the cottage, the quiet grief, the stagnant days, the stories she had abandoned. Now the sea had become her confidant, its messages coaxing her to look inward. Her thoughts turned to the writer of the notes. She had imagined them many times, a lonely sailor, a wistful dreamer, someone who understood the language of the sea. The idea of such a person filled her with both curiosity and comfort. Whoever they were, they had ignited something within her, something she hadn't felt in years. Back at the cottage, Isla placed the new note with the others on her desk. The collection was growing, each message a thread in a tapestry she was still unraveling. She spent the afternoon writing, her pen gliding across the pages of her notebook. The words came more easily now, her thoughts flowing like the waves that had carried the notes to her. The evening brought a soft rain that pattered against the windows, blurring the view of the sea. Isla lit a fire in the hearth and settled into the armchair by the window, the warmth of the flames wrapping around her like a blanket. She reread the notes, searching for patterns, connections, clues that might reveal the writer's identity. But the messages remained elusive, their mystery as vast as the ocean itself. That night, Isla dreamed of the sea. She stood on the shore, the waves lapping at her feet, and saw a figure in the distance. They were silhouetted against the horizon, their features obscured by the golden light of the setting sun. In their hands, they held a bottle, which they cast into the water with a gentle, deliberate motion. The bottle drifted toward her, the waves carrying it closer and closer until she could almost reach it. But before her fingers could grasp it, she woke. The dream lingered as she prepared for the day. There was a sense of urgency in the air, as if the sea itself was calling her. She hurried to the beach, her footsteps quick and purposeful. The tide was low, the shoreline littered with shells and seaweed. She searched for hours, her eyes scanning every inch of the sand, but there was no bottle to be found. Disappointment settled over her as she returned to the cottage. The absence of a new message felt like a void, a silence she hadn't realized she feared. She sat at her desk, staring at the notes, willing them to reveal something she had missed. But the answers eluded her, slipping through her fingers like grains of sand. It was then that Isla realized something profound. The notes, while precious, were not the source of her transformation. They had been a spark, a catalyst, but the fire they had ignited burned within her. The words she had written in her notebook, the stories she had begun to tell, they were hers, and they were enough. She picked up her pen and began to write, not because she hoped for another message, but because she had something to say. The sea continued its endless rhythm outside her window, a reminder that life, like the waves, was constant and ever-changing. Isla wrote until the sun dipped below the horizon, her words flowing freely, unburdened by expectation. That night, as she stood on the porch, the moonlight shimmering on the waves, she felt a quiet peace settle over her. The sea had given her a gift, one that went beyond the bottles and their messages. It had reminded her of her own strength, her own voice, her own tide. And she knew, deep in her heart, that she would keep listening to the whispers of the sea, even if the bottles never came again. The horizon beckons. The days that followed were filled with an unusual stillness. Isla continued her routine of walking the beach, writing in her notebook, and gazing at the sea from her porch. But the absence of new bottles left a void she couldn't ignore. The sea, though vast and ever-moving, felt quieter somehow, as if it too was waiting. She tried to fill the silence with words, but her thoughts often drifted back to the mysterious messages that had once arrived with the tide. One crisp morning, Isla decided to explore beyond her usual stretch of beach. The idea came to her suddenly, sparked by a restless energy she couldn't explain. She packed a small bag with water and snacks, slipped on her boots, and set off along the shoreline. The tide was low, revealing rocky outcrops and small pools teeming with life. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries echoing against the cliffs. The further she walked, the more the landscape changed. The sand grew coarser, scattered with larger rocks and patches of seaweed. Tall grasses swayed in the wind, their rustling a gentle counterpoint to the roar of the waves. Isla felt a strange exhilaration as she ventured into unfamiliar territory, her curiosity pulling her forward. After an hour of walking, she came upon a secluded cove. The cliffs surrounding it were steep and jagged, but the beach below was pristine, untouched. The sand was pale and fine, and the water shimmered with hues of turquoise and silver. Isla descended carefully, using the natural footholds in the rock. When her boots touched the sand, she paused to take it all in. The cove felt like a hidden world, a place where time moved differently. It was there, nestled between two rocks, that she found another bottle. Her heart leapt as she hurried toward it, the excitement she had missed flooding back in an instant. The bottle was smaller than the others, its glass tinted a soft green. Isla uncorked it with practiced ease and unrolled the note inside. The handwriting, as always, was familiar, but the message this time was longer. The horizon holds secrets the shore cannot see. To follow its call is to embrace the unknown. What lies beyond your horizon? Isla read the words several times, their meaning unfolding with each pass. The horizon, so constant, yet always out of reach, had become a metaphor for her own life. She had spent so long anchored to her grief, afraid to venture beyond it. But now, standing in this hidden cove with the sea stretching endlessly before her, she felt a stirring of possibility. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her bag. Sitting on a smooth rock, she gazed out at the horizon, the question lingering in her mind. What lay beyond it? The thought both excited and frightened her. She realized she had spent so much time looking for answers in the bottles that she hadn't stopped to consider what she might find within herself. The journey back to the cottage felt lighter somehow, as if the message had lifted a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. That evening, Isla sat at her desk and wrote a response. Her words came easily, a reflection of the clarity she felt. To the one who sees beyond the horizon, your words have guided me further than I thought possible. I am ready to see what lies ahead. Thank you for showing me the way. She sealed the note in a bottle and carried it to the beach. The moon was high, casting a silver path across the waves. Isla waded into the cool water, the bottle in her hands. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of her words before releasing it into the sea. The waves carried it away, and she watched until it disappeared from view. That night, Isla dreamed of the horizon. She stood on a boat, its sails full with wind, the water beneath her shimmering like liquid gold. Ahead, the horizon glowed with a soft, otherworldly light, as if beckoning her forward. She felt no fear, only a quiet determination to see what lay beyond. The next morning, Isla woke with a sense of purpose. The notes had been her guide, but now she felt ready to chart her own course. She packed her bag again, this time with more intention. Her notebook, a pen, a map of the coastline, and a small compass went into it. As she stepped out of the cottage, the sea greeted her with its familiar rhythm, a reminder that it would always be there, constant and unyielding. Isla set off toward the cove, her heart open to whatever she might find. The path was the same, but her steps felt different, more deliberate, more confident. The horizon still called to her, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. And for the first time, Isla felt ready to meet them. The secrets beneath the waves. Mamur. The morning sun climbed higher, casting a golden glow over the endless expanse of water as Isla reached the secluded cove. The path had grown familiar, but each step now felt charged with anticipation. She carried her notebook, her bag filled with essentials, and a growing sense that the answers she sought were drawing closer. The cove's pristine sands shimmered in the light, and the tide was low, revealing stretches of exposed rock and glistening tidal pools. Isla paused to take in the view, her eyes scanning for any sign of a new message. Her heart leapt as she spotted something glinting near a cluster of rocks. With careful steps, she approached, her pulse quickening with each stride. The bottle was different this time. Its glass was a deep cobalt blue, and it seemed heavier than the others. The cork was sealed tightly with wax, as though to ensure the note inside remained untouched by the sea. Isla's fingers trembled as she uncorked it, her excitement tempered by a strange sense of reverence. The note was rolled meticulously, its edges clean and crisp. She unrolled it slowly, her breath catching as she read the words. The sea holds more than what the eye can see. Beneath its surface lie treasures and truths. Are you ready to dive deeper? The message felt different, more direct, as though challenging her to step beyond her comfort zone. Isla folded the note carefully, tucking it into her notebook. She sat on a smooth rock, the waves lapping gently at her boots, and let the question linger in her mind. What did it mean to dive deeper? The sea had always felt like a boundary, a vast and unknowable entity. To consider its depths was to confront the unknown. For hours, Isla remained at the cove, her thoughts swirling like the currents. She explored the tidal pools, their still waters revealing tiny ecosystems teeming with life. She knelt to observe the vibrant sea anemones, the darting fish, the intricate patterns etched into the shells of crabs. Each discovery felt like a small revelation, a reminder of the mysteries that lay hidden beneath the surface. As the tide began to rise, Isla made her way back to the cottage. The walk felt heavier, her mind weighed down by the message and the realization that she had been avoiding the deeper questions in her life. Back at her desk, she laid out all the notes she had collected, arranging them in the order she had found them. Together, they formed a narrative, one that seemed to be guiding her, not just to answers, but to herself. That evening, Isla wrote her response. The words came haltingly at first, but soon they flowed with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. To the one who sees the depths, I am ready to dive. Show me the treasures beneath the waves, the truths I have yet to uncover. I trust the journey wherever it may lead. She placed the note in a bottle, sealing it tightly before walking to the beach. The sky was painted in hues of lavender and gold, the sea reflecting its brilliance. Isla stood at the water's edge, the cool waves washing over her feet as she released the bottle. It bobbed for a moment before the tide carried it away, its path illuminated by the setting sun. The night brought vivid dreams. Isla found herself standing on a narrow ledge, the ocean stretching endlessly below her. The water shimmered with an ethereal light, and she could see shapes moving beneath the surface. A voice, soft and melodic, seemed to whisper her name, urging her to leap. She hesitated, her fear mingling with curiosity, but before she could move, she woke. The dream stayed with her as she prepared for the day. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a product of her imagination. The sea had always felt alive, but now it seemed to be calling her, guiding her towards something she couldn't yet define. Determined to follow its lead, Isla packed her bag and returned to the cove. This time, she waded into the water, the cool waves lapping at her legs. The tide was low, and she ventured further than she had before, her eyes scanning the shallows. She found herself drawn to a cluster of rocks partially submerged, their surfaces slick with algae. As she approached, her gaze caught on something wedged between the stones. It was another bottle, smaller and more delicate than the others, its glass a shimmering translucent gold. Isla retrieved it carefully, her breath hitching as she uncorked it. The note inside was unlike the others. Its paper was thicker, its edges gilded. The handwriting, though familiar, seemed more deliberate, more precise. The message read, "To uncover the treasures of the sea, one must embrace its depths. The journey is not without risk, but the rewards are boundless. Trust yourself. The answers lie within." The words resonated deeply, their meaning unfolding in her mind like the tides. Isla realized that the journey the note spoke of was not just about the sea, but about her own life. To embrace its depths was to confront the parts of herself she had kept hidden, the fears she had ignored, the dreams she had abandoned. She sat on the rocks, the waves crashing around her, and allowed herself to feel the weight of the message. The sea, with all its mystery and power, had become a mirror, reflecting her own journey back to her. And for the first time, she felt ready to dive in. Into the unknown, gazing out at the horizon. The morning came with a sky streaked in pale pinks and silvers, the air cool and crisp. Isla stood on the porch, gazing out at the horizon. The dream from the night before lingered in her mind. A dream of diving into the sea, of discovering something extraordinary beneath the waves. It wasn't the first time her dreams had intertwined with her waking thoughts, but this one felt different, urgent. She packed her bag as if preparing for a journey she couldn't fully articulate. Her notebook, a bottle of water, a scarf to guard against the chill, and a small charm. A polished seashell her mother had given her years ago. It felt like the right thing to bring, though she wasn't sure why. The beach was quiet, the tide low, exposing a labyrinth of rocks and tidal pools that shimmered in the early light. Isla's boots crunched softly against the sand as she walked, her eyes scanning for anything out of place. Her thoughts drifted to the messages she had received so far, each one nudging her closer to something she couldn't yet define. The words lingered in her mind like fragments of a poem. Beneath its surface lie treasures and truths. The answers lie within. As she approached the familiar cove, a peculiar sense of calm settled over her. The waves lapped gently against the shore, their rhythms steady and soothing. She made her way toward the cluster of rocks where she had found the gilded note, her movements purposeful yet unhurried. Her gaze caught something glinting beneath the surface of a shallow pool, a shape too smooth, too deliberate to be natural. Isla crouched, her hand reaching into the cool water. She pulled out a bottle unlike any she had seen before, its glass an opaque white, swirling faintly with iridescent colors. It felt warmer than the surrounding water, almost alive in her hands. She uncorked it with care, the faint scent of salt and seaweed rising as she withdrew the note inside. The paper was pristine, its edges embossed with intricate patterns of waves and stars. Her breath hitched as she read, "The unknown calls to those who listen." Beyond the horizon lies not just discovery, but transformation. Trust the journey. The message felt both familiar and profound, as though it had been written not for her, but from her. Isla folded the note carefully and slipped it into her bag, her fingers lingering on the smooth surface of the bottle. She stayed at the pool for a long moment, watching the sunlight dance across its surface before rising to her feet. For the first time, she felt ready to let the sea guide her completely. She waded into the water, her movements slow and deliberate. The tide was gentle, the waves cool against her legs. Isla paused when the water reached her waist, taking a deep breath. The sea stretched endlessly before her, its surface glittering with the light of the sun. It felt like a threshold, a gateway to something greater. With a final breath, Isla dove. The water enveloped her, its coolness startling but not unpleasant. She opened her eyes, the salt water stinging briefly before her vision adjusted. Below her, the world transformed. Shafts of sunlight pierced the surface, illuminating an underwater landscape that seemed to pulse with life. Schools of fish darted around her, their scales shimmering like fragments of a rainbow. Coral formations rose like ancient towers, their vibrant colors almost otherworldly. Isla swam deeper, the water growing cooler as the light dimmed. She felt a faint vibration in her pocket, the stone she had carried since finding the gilded note. It seemed to hum softly as if urging her forward. She followed its pull, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Ahead she saw an opening, a narrow crevice in the rock that led to a larger space beyond. Isla hesitated for a moment, her instincts battling her curiosity. But the stone's vibration grew stronger, steadying her resolve. She swam through the opening, the space widening into a vast underwater cavern. The sight took her breath away. The cavern was bathed in a soft, ethereal glow, its walls lined with bioluminescent plants that cast shimmering patterns across the water. In the center stood a pedestal, carved from stone and adorned with intricate symbols. Atop it rested a sphere of glass, its surface swirling with colors that seemed to shift and flow like the tides. Isla approached slowly, her movements careful and reverent. She reached out, her fingers brushing the surface of the sphere. It was warm to the touch, its energy pulsing faintly against her skin. As her hand closed around it, a surge of emotion washed over her. Joy, sorrow, hope, and something deeper she couldn't name. The sphere felt alive, as though it carried the essence of the sea itself. A voice, soft and melodic, echoed in her mind. "You have journeyed far, Isla. The answers you seek are already within you. Trust your heart, and you will find your way." Tears blurred her vision as the words settled over her. The sphere's light grew brighter, enveloping her in its glow. For a moment she felt weightless, suspended in a timeless space where the boundaries between the sea and herself dissolved. Then, gently, the light began to fade, and Isla found herself back in the cavern, the sphere still cradled in her hands. She swam back to the surface, the weight of the sphere grounding her even as her heart soared. The sunlight greeted her like an old friend, its warmth a reminder of the life waiting for her beyond the waves. Isla waded back to the shore, her steps purposeful, her mind clear. The horizon stretched before her, endless and full of promise. And for the first time, Isla felt ready to meet it. The Sea's Gift. The light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sea in hues of amber and rose. Isla sat on the porch of her cottage, the sphere she had retrieved from the underwater cavern resting in her hands. Its surface shimmered faintly, its colors shifting like the tides. She turned it over slowly, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story she couldn't yet decipher. It felt alive, as though the sea's essence had been distilled into this one small, radiant object. The voice from the cavern echoed in her mind. "The answers you seek are already within you." Isla's thoughts churned like the waves, her understanding of the words still incomplete. What did it mean to have the answers within herself? And what was she meant to do with this gift? Determined to find clarity, Isla set the sphere gently on her desk and reached for her notebook. The pages were filled with fragments of thoughts, beginnings of stories, and observations from her time by the sea. She flipped to a fresh page, the blank space both inviting and daunting. Taking a deep breath, she began to write. The sea has always spoken, its voice as constant as the waves, but its whispers carry more than the sound of water against sand. They carry truths, waiting for those who listen. The words flowed easily, her pen gliding across the paper. Isla wrote about the notes, the bottles, the stone, and the journey that had led her to the cavern. Each detail felt like a thread in a larger tapestry, weaving together the lessons she had learned. She wrote about her fears and doubts, about the grief that had once held her captive, and about the slow, steady healing that the sea had brought. By the time she paused to read over what she had written, the sun was high in the sky, its warmth spilling through the window. The sphere caught the sunlight, its glow intensifying. Isla reached for it, holding it up to the light. As she turned it, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small, almost imperceptible indentation on its surface. She pressed her thumb against it, and the sphere pulsed faintly in response. Startled but intrigued, Isla held her breath as the sphere began to emit a soft, melodic hum. The sound grew, filling the room with a resonance that seemed to vibrate in her chest. The sphere's glow deepened, and images began to swirl within its depths. At first, they were indistinct, shadows and light shifting like the currents, but slowly they took shape. Isla saw glimpses of her journey, the bottles on the shore, the notes that had guided her, the dreamlike cavern beneath the waves. And then she saw something new. A map. The lines were faint, but unmistakable, tracing a path along the coastline. Isla leaned closer, her heart racing as she studied the details. The map marked a destination, a place further down the shore she hadn't yet explored. The sight of it filled her with equal parts excitement and apprehension. The sea had given her this gift, this clue, and now it was asking her to trust it once again. The following morning, Isla set out with a renewed sense of purpose. The map from the sphere was etched in her mind, its details clear and vivid. She packed her bag carefully, including her notebook, water, and the polished stone that had guided her before. The sphere rested in a padded compartment, its glow dim but steady. The path along the shore grew rougher as she ventured beyond her familiar haunts. The sand gave way to rocky terrain, the cliffs rising steeply on one side. The sea crashed against the rocks with a thunderous rhythm, the spray cool against her skin. Isla's steps were sure, her determination unshaken by the challenging terrain. Hours passed before she reached the spot marked on the map. The landscape opened into a hidden cove, its beauty taking her breath away. The sand was pristine, the water a vivid turquoise that sparkled in the midday sun. In the center of the cove stood a towering rock formation, its surface carved with patterns that mirrored those on the sphere. Isla approached cautiously, the sphere in her hands. The rock seemed to hum faintly as she neared, its vibrations resonating with the sphere. She placed the sphere into a hollow at the base of the formation, its fit perfect. The ground beneath her feet trembled slightly, and the rock began to glow, its patterns illuminated by an inner light. A doorway appeared, its edges shimmering like the surface of the sea. Isla hesitated for only a moment before stepping through. The air inside was cool and damp, the space lit by the same bioluminescent glow she had seen in the underwater cavern. The walls were adorned with carvings that told stories of the sea, tales of storms and calm, of loss and renewal, of journeys taken and lessons learned. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and on it rested a book. Its cover was made of a material that seemed both ancient and alive, its surface shifting subtly like the tides. Isla approached reverently, her fingers brushing the cover before she opened it. The pages were filled with writing, the words flowing like poetry. As she read, she realized the book was telling her own story. Every step of her journey was recorded, from the first bottle to the cavern to this very moment. The book spoke of her fears and triumphs, her pain and growth. It revealed truths she hadn't yet admitted to herself, weaving them into a narrative that felt both deeply personal and universal. As Isla reached the final page, the words shifted, forming a message just for her. Your story is yours to write. The sea has shown you its wisdom, but the next chapter belongs to you. Trust your heart, Isla, and let it guide you. Tears filled her eyes as she closed the book, its cover pulsing warmly beneath her hands. The chamber around her seemed to sigh, its light dimming slightly as if to signal the end of her journey there. Isla took the book and the sphere, their weight grounding her as she stepped back through the doorway and into the sunlight. The horizon stretched before her, endless and inviting. Isla stood at the edge of the cove, her heart full of gratitude and purpose. The sea had given her its gift, but it was up to her to decide what to do with it. And as she began the walk back to her cottage, she knew one thing for certain. Her story was just beginning. a new tide. The walk back to the cottage felt different. The air seemed lighter, the path more vibrant, as if the world itself recognized the transformation within Isla. The sphere and the book rested safely in her bag, their presence grounding her. Each step carried a sense of finality, not an ending, but the conclusion of one chapter before the beginning of another. The cottage came into view just as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting the sea in a fiery glow. Isla paused at the edge of the path, her gaze drawn to the waves. They moved with a familiar rhythm, steady and unyielding, yet now she saw them in a new light. The sea had always been a part of her, its whispers woven into her story. Now she felt ready to answer its call. Inside, the cottage welcomed her with its quiet warmth. Isla set the book and sphere on her desk, their soft glow illuminating the room. She lit a fire in the hearth and made a cup of tea, the simple rituals grounding her after the day's discoveries. As the flames danced, she opened the book once more, her fingers brushing the pages as she read her story in its entirety. The words carried her through her journey, the bottles, the notes, the underwater cavern, and the map. Each event was written with a clarity she hadn't realized at the time, the narrative revealing connections she hadn't seen before. The book was more than a record. It was a guide, a reminder of how far she had come and how much she had yet to explore. When she reached the final page, she noticed something she hadn't seen earlier. Beneath the message was a blank space, its emptiness inviting. Isla reached for her pen, her heart steady as she began to write. The sea has given me its gift, but the next steps are mine to take. I will listen to its whispers, trust its tides, and let it guide me as I write the story only I can tell. The words felt right, each stroke of the pen grounding her resolve. As she set the pen down, the book pulsed faintly, its cover glowing with approval. Isla closed it gently and placed it beside the sphere, their presence a quiet reassurance. That night, her dreams were calm, the sea's voice a steady hum in the background. She awoke with the first light of dawn, her heart clear and her mind at peace. The horizon called to her, its promise no longer daunting but inviting. Isla knew the sea's lessons would always be with her, guiding her through the tides of life. As she stepped onto the porch, the morning air was cool and invigorating. The waves rolled in a familiar rhythm, their sounds steady and grounding. Isla took a deep breath, the salty breeze filling her lungs. Her story wasn't just beginning, it was already unfolding, and she was ready to embrace it. The open horizon. The morning sunlight spilled across the waves, casting them in a radiant glow as Isla stood on the shoreline. Her gaze rested on the horizon, now a symbol of everything she had come to understand. It no longer felt distant or unreachable. Instead, it felt like an invitation, a vast, open canvas waiting for her to paint her story upon it. Isla carried the book and sphere in her bag as she made her way to the cove one final time. The path felt familiar, yet imbued with a new sense of purpose. Each step carried a clarity she hadn't known in years, as though the earth itself recognized the transformation she had undergone. The sea's steady rhythm accompanied her, its whispers no longer enigmatic but comforting and clear. When she reached the cove, Isla paused to take it all in. The turquoise water sparkled under the sun, and the air carried the faint scent of salt and wildflowers. The towering rock formation where she had placed the sphere stood like a sentinel watching over the shore. She approached it slowly, her fingers brushing the patterns carved into the stone. It felt warm beneath her touch, as if alive with the energy of the sea. Isla placed the sphere back into the hollow at the base of the formation. The rock hummed softly, its light pulsing in time with the waves. The air around her seemed to vibrate, and for a moment she felt weightless, as though she were part of the sea itself. The glow from the rock intensified, then faded, leaving behind a stillness that felt sacred. She stepped back, her heart full. The sphere had guided her, but it was no longer needed. Its purpose had been fulfilled, just as Isla now understood her own. She turned her gaze to the horizon, its endless expanse a promise of new beginnings. The world felt boundless, her path no longer dictated by fear or hesitation, but by a quiet, unshakable confidence. Back at the cottage, Isla set the book on her desk. The pages, once filled only with the story of her journey, now called for something more. She opened it to the blank space at the end and began to write, her pen moving with purpose. The sea is a mirror, reflecting not only its depths, but the depths within us. It has shown me that life, like the waves, is ever-changing and unyielding. To embrace its rhythm is to embrace the unknown, to trust the tides as they carry us forward. The words flowed effortlessly, her thoughts aligning with the wisdom she had gained. She wrote of her journey, not as an ending but as a beginning. The sea had taught her to listen, to trust, and to see beyond the horizon. And now, it was her turn to share that gift with the world. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Isla sat on the porch with a cup of tea in hand. The waves rolled steadily, their sound a lullaby that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. She watched the sky shift from gold to crimson to indigo, each color a reminder of life's beauty and impermanence. Her thoughts turned to the future. She didn't know where the tides would take her next, but for the first time, that uncertainty felt freeing. She had learned to trust the journey, to let the sea guide her without fear. Her story was hers to write, and the possibilities stretched as endlessly as the horizon before her. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Isla whispered a quiet thank you to the sea. It had been her teacher, her confidant, and her mirror. It had shown her not just its own depths, but her own, and for that, she would always be grateful. The night deepened, the waves continuing their eternal dance. Isla closed her eyes, her heart full of peace and promise. The horizon waited and she was ready. Thank you for joining us on Story Planet. If you felt the gentle rhythm of the waves and the quiet wisdom of the sea through this tale, consider giving it a thumbs up. And if this story brought you peace and calm, feel free to share it with friends and family. Don't forget to subscribe for more serene and inspiring stories every day. Wishing you a peaceful night and restful sleep. Sweet dreams.